My program today is the Scottish in the American Revolution. And during the 1770s, the majority of Scots in America either sided with the crown, moved away either to Canada or returned home to Scotland, or remained neutral to the conflict. And it's estimated that for every one Scotsman who supported the colonists in the American Revolution, there were approximately 12 who remained loyal to the crown. Why would the Scots, who oftentimes had a very strained relationship with England, disavow the American Revolution? So, to better understand why the Scots would remain loyal to the British, I wanted to first discuss the historical relationship between Scotland and England. And this will be just a very brief historical overview. In 1297, English monarch Edward I believed he should be recognized as overlord of Scotland and led an army to invade Scotland. His army crossed the River Forth at Stirling Bridge, where the Scottish army, led by William Wallace, forced the English to retreat. In 1306, Robert the Bruce is crowned King of Scotland. Fighting with the English continued, and his army defeated the English army led by Edward II at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. In 1320, specifically April the 6th, the Declaration of Arbroath. It was a letter signed by Scottish barons and nobles sent to Pope John XII proclaiming Scotland's status as an independent sovereign nation. The declaration essentially outlines that the king, who had been previously regarded as appointed by God, could be forced out if he did not uphold the freedom of the country. And this is one of the most important documents in Scottish history, and many historians believe it inspired the founding fathers to write the United States Declaration of Independence. And we'll revisit this document later on in the program. In 1542, Mary, 6-day-old daughter of James V, is crowned Queen of Scots, but her reign is marked by a growing Catholic-Protestant conflict and civil unrest. She is later imprisoned by her cousin, Elizabeth I of England, and after several years, she's executed in 1567. 1603, the Union of the Crowns. James VI of Scotland, who's the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, succeeds to the English throne as James I upon the death of Elizabeth I. And here, England and Scotland are united under one monarch, but they still have separate parliaments. In 1707, the Acts of Union. This created a single parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And by two acts, the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland, which were prior to 1707, were two separate states with separate parliaments, but the same monarch, were now, in the words of the treaty, united into one kingdom by the name of Great Britain. And Christopher Whatley, a professor of Scottish history at the University of Dundee, an author of The Scots and the Union Then and Now, notes that there are several reasons for this union. And one being Scotland was in debt after trying to establish a colonial empire in the Americas, similar to the way that England, Portugal, and Spain had done. And the Scots recognized that if they were to establish settlements overseas, markets overseas, they needed the support of a strong maritime power, which, of course, was England. And also, the Scots saw this union as a way of preventing the Catholic Stuarts, supported by the Jacobites, from reinstating an absolute monarchy. And they were wanting to secure Scotland's future under a Protestant constitutional monarchy. And for England, there was concern that if they did not unite with Scotland, that Scotland would side against England with France in the War of Spanish Succession. So what you have in 1707 is England agreed to provide money to Scotland to pay off its debts, and now both countries are united under Great Britain. And I wanted to briefly mention the Jacobites. And just to give a little back history, the Jacobites were wanting to reinstate the Stuart line. What occurred was James II, a Catholic, was deposed and exiled in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. He was succeeded by his elder daughter, Mary II, and her husband, William III, became co-monarchs. And the Bill of Rights of 1689 and Act of Settlement of 1701 excluded Catholics from the British throne. William and Mary were later succeeded by Anne, who served as Queen of Great Britain until her death in 1714. But upon her death, she was succeeded by George I, who was her closest living Protestant relative, who was essentially a German, thus starting the House of Hanover. So Mary and Anne's half-brother, Charles Edward Stuart, a Catholic, led these growing rebellions. And these took place in 1708, 1715, and 1745. And pictured here is Charles Edward Stuart, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. And he led the final rebellion at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. And this was a very disastrous battle on behalf of these Jacobites. The battle lasted approximately an hour. There were many casualties for the Jacobites, which is estimated at between 1,500 or 2,000 who were either killed or wounded. And what occurred after the battle was just as devastating, because now the British government enacted laws to integrate Scotland, specifically the Scottish Highlands, with the rest of Britain. We have the Heritable Jurisdictions Act of 1746, which ended the right of clan chiefs to hold court and try certain cases. And then we have the Dress Act of 1746, which made it illegal to wear the Highland dress, which included this kilt, own a bagpipe, or speak or teach Scottish Gaelic. And to avoid imprisonment or even execution, many Highland Scots were forced to take an oath not to take up arms against the British crown ever again. And here's a painting depicting the Battle of Culloden. And this year marks the 275th anniversary of this battle. Now, with respect to Scottish migration to the American colonies, it's estimated that more than 50,000 Scots settled in the 13 colonies between 1763 and 1776 throughout the various 13 colonies. And Scottish settlement in colonial America is typically divided by historians into three separate streams. We have the Lowland Scots, the Highland Scots, and the Ulster Scots, which are more familiar, known as the Scots Irish. The Lowland Scots began to migrate to North America in the 18th century, typically after the union of England and Scotland. And they tended to settle in low-lying coastal areas in cities such as New York and New Jersey. And they typically would assimilate into their communities and they would remain loyal to the crown in the Revolution. Your Highland Scots started arriving in North America in the 1730s, but more so after the Battle of Culloden. And they tended to remain together in self-contained communities where they could preserve their cultural features, such as language and music. And finally, the Ulster Scots, also known as the Scots Irish, these would have been descended from people originally from the Scottish lowlands who colonized the province of Ulster in Ireland in the 17th century. And then after several generations, their descendants would have left for America to settle in the colonies. And these are the Ulster Scots that we would be more well known as settling in the Appalachian Mountains. And unlike the Highlanders and Lowlanders, they were typically patriots in the Revolution. And here are two different maps. The map on the right, you get an idea of what's considered the Highlands and the Lowlands of Scotland with this break here. And then the map on the left gives you an idea of the area of the Lowland Scots who migrated and settled in Northern Ireland in the Ulster province. And this is a map that's prepared by Macmillan Design. And it may be a little hard to read, but you can get an idea of the migratory patterns of the Ulster Scots, seen here in green, settling in the Appalachian mountain areas. And then the arrows in red would be the typical settlements for the Highland Scots. So, given their history of oppression by the English, so it can be a little confusing as to why there wasn't more support for the American patriots by the Scots. But there's many reasons why the Scots would have remained loyal to Britain once settled in colonial America. One would be economic reasons. Under the Navigation Acts, which was a great frustration to American traders, Scots were permitted to carry on trade with British colonies without paying the tariffs associated with foreign states. There were employment reasons. The British state was far more capable of offering employment to Scots than the small Scottish state had been pre-1707. And the biggest source for employment proved to be the armies of the British state and the East India Company. The Highland Scots emerged as a leading supplier of manpower for British armies by the 1760s. And Highland soldiers would fight in both the French and Indian War and the War of American Independence in large numbers. And there were political benefits. Now that England and Scotland were under one parliament, there were more and more Scots involved in British politics. And in 1762, John Stuart, a native Scot, was named Prime Minister of Great Britain. And, again, there was also moral reasons, reasons related to their community, which would have led them to remain loyal to the crown. And there's two battles that I wanted to discuss in particular. The first being the Battle of Morris Creek Bridge. The Battle of Moores Creek Bridge was the first battle of the American Revolution to take place in North Carolina. In early January 1776, exiled Governor Josiah Martin received notification from London that his plan to restore royal authority in North Carolina had been approved. Two commands of British regulars, one composed of 7 regiments under Lord Charles Cornwallis, and the other made up of 2,000 troops led by Sir Henry Clinton, would sail from Ireland and New England, respectively, and converge on the lower Cape Fear River near Brunswick Town. And there they would be joined by an army of loyalists who would assist in putting down the rebellion. On the 10th of January 1776, Martin issued a call for loyal subjects to serve as troops and a proclamation ordering the royal standard to be raised in North Carolina. By mid-February, approximately 1,600 Highland Scots and other loyalists had assembled at Cross Creek. Commanding the troops was Brigadier General Donald Mcdougall, a veteran of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And these Highlanders, led by Donald MacDonald, Donald MacLeod, and John Campbell, were en route to Wilmington from their settlement of Cross Creek when they walked into an ambush by North Carolina patriots led by James Moore, Richard Caswell, and Alexander Lillington at a bridge crossing Widow's Moor Creek, which flows into the Black River, a tributary of the Cape Fear River. And the resulting battle was sharp and decisive. The Scots loyalists lost 30 to 50 casualties and about 850 prisoners. The Patriots only lost 1 man who was killed and 1 wounded. And MacDonald was captured and became a prisoner of war. And called the Lexington and Concord of the South, the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge was significant for several reasons. It marked the permanent end of royal authority in North Carolina. It prompted the Provincial Congress meeting in Halifax on the 12th of April, 1776, to instruct North Carolina's delegation to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia to vote for independence, and it prevented the British from seizing control of the South at the onset of the war. And the site of this battle, including the reconstructed bridge, has been preserved within the Moores Creek National Military Park. And within the park, there is a monument to those Scots who fell in battle. And an in part reads, "Here fell Captain MacLeod, Captain Campbell, and about 50 Highland Scots, loyalists, who with splendid courage assaulted with claymores the American entrenchments. They were heroes who did their duty as they saw it and are worthy of this tribute from the descendants of the equally brave men whom they fought. Peace to their ashes." And a second battle I wanted to discuss was the Battle of Kings Mountain. This was a military engagement between Patriot and Loyalist militias in South Carolina during the Southern campaign of the American Revolutionary War, resulting in a decisive victory for the Patriots. This battle took place on October 7th, 1780, 9 miles south of the present-day town of Kings Mountain, North Carolina. In what is now rural Cherokee County, South Carolina, the Patriot militia defeated the Loyalist militia, commanded by British Major Patrick Ferguson, who was a native Scot, of the 71st Foot. And the battle was a pivotal event in the Southern campaign. The surprising victory of the American Patriot militia over the Loyalist came after a string of Patriot defeats at the hands of Lord Cornwallis, and greatly raised the Patriots' morale. With Ferguson dead and his Loyalist militia destroyed, Cornwallis was forced to abandon his plan to invade North Carolina and retreated into South Carolina. And this battle has also been described as a battle between Scots Irish Patriots and Scottish Loyalists. Again, the Loyalist militia was commanded by British Major Patrick Ferguson, a native Scot, of the 71st Foot, And this regiment was raised at Inverness, Stirling, and Glasgow by Lieutenant General Simon Fraser of Lovat as the 71st Regiment of Foot in 1775. And also, what I found interesting, there is a specific tartan for those Scots who died or served at Kings Mountain. And this is a tartan registered with the Scottish Register of Tartans. And this tartan may be worn by a descendant of those whose ancestors fought on either side at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Now, there are some very notable Scots who did support the colonists in the American Revolution. First is John Paul Jones. He was the United States' first well-known naval commander in the American Revolutionary War. He was a native Scot. He was born near Kirkbean in the southwest coast of Scotland. And his actions in British waters during the Revolution earned him an international reputation, which persists to this day. As such, he is often referred to as the father of the American Navy. Hugh Mercer. He was a Scottish soldier and physician. He initially served with the Jacobites forces of Bonnie Prince Charlie, then with the British forces during the 7 Years' War, but later became a brigadier general in the Continental Army and a close friend of George Washington. Mercer died as a result of his wounds received at the Battle of Princeton and became a fallen hero as well as a rallying symbol for the American Revolution. Alexander Mcdougall, a native Scots. He was a seaman, merchant, a Sons of Liberty leader from New York City before and during the American Revolution, and a military leader during the Revolutionary War. He served as a major general in the Continental Army and as a delegate to the Continental Congress. After the war, he was the president of the first bank in the state of New York, and he served a term in the New York State Senate. Lachlan Mackintosh, Scottish-American military and political leader during the American Revolution. He was born near Raith, Scotland, or in Raith, Scotland, and his father moved the family to Georgia in 1736 with about a group of 100 Scottish settlers, and there they founded the town of New Inverness, which was later named Darien in Georgia. Alexander Hamilton, second-generation Scots, son of James A. Hamilton, native Scotsman. Alexander Hamilton was an influential interpreter and promoter of the U.S. Constitution, as well as the founder of the nation's financial system, the Federalist Party, the United States Coast Guard, and the New York Post newspaper. He served as the first Secretary of the Treasury. He took the lead in the federal government's funding of the state's debts, as well as establishing the nation's first two de facto central banks, the Bank of North America and the First Bank of the United States. Patrick Henry, an American attorney, planner, politician, an orator, best known for his declaration to the Second Virginia Convention, "Give me liberty or give me death." He served as the first and sixth post-colonial governor of Virginia from 1776 to 1779 and 1784 to 1786. And his father, John Henry, was a native Scot. Henry Knox, a military officer of the Continental Army and later the United States Army. He also served as the first United States Secretary of War from 1789 to 1794. Henry Knox's parents, William and Mary, were Ulster Scot immigrants who immigrated from Derry to Boston in 1729. And I wanted to revisit the Declaration of Arbroath, which, again, is one of the greatest icons of Scotland. And it's often argued that it became a model for the American Declaration of Independence. Because, again, it's often referred to as the Scottish Declaration of Independence. And it's interesting when you look at the language of both documents. To the left, we see, as long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone, which no honest man gives up but with life itself. And of course, the famous passage from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Linda McDonald Lewis, author of Warriors and Wordsmiths of Freedom, The Birth and Growth of Democracy, believes this was a deliberate model for the American Declaration of Independence, because she notes that of the 56 men who signed this document, at least 21 were of Scottish descent, which, considering the population at that time, was highly disproportionate, because there were only about 6.7% of Scots in the general colonial population in 1790. And you'll notice the date of the Declaration of Arbroath, which is the 6th of April, which is a day commemorated in the United States as National Tartan Day. In 1998, former Majority Leader Trent Lott succeeded in instituting an annual National Tartan Day on April the 6th by resolution of the United States Senate, stating that the Declaration of Arbroath, the Scottish Declaration of Independence, was signed on April 6, 1320, and the American Declaration of Independence was modeled on that inspirational document. And in his presidential proclamation, 8233, issued in 2008, President George W. Bush noted on National Tartan Day, April the 6th, the Declaration of Arbroath, the Scottish Declaration of Independence, signed in 1320, embodied the Scots' strong dedication to liberty, and the Scots brought that tradition of freedom with them to the New World. Sons and daughters of many Scottish clans were among the first immigrants to settle in America, and their determination and optimism helped build our nation's character. So that concludes the program, and I hope you found it informative.